As she sat watching the world go by, something caught her eye. It wasn't so much its color or shape, but the way it was moving. She squinted to see if she could better understand what it was and where it was going, but it didn't help. As she continued to stare into the distance, she didn't understand why this uneasiness was building inside her body. When truth is spoken, it has the power to shake the foundations of everything built on lies. The Quran is not just a book, it is a force, a divine message that has transformed civilizations, empowered the weak, and challenged oppression. That is why they fear it. They don't fear the paper it is printed on, nor the words themselves, but the impact those words have on the hearts and minds of those who truly understand them. Because when a person begins to see clearly, when they begin to recognize their worth, their purpose, and the injustice around them, they become unstoppable. Throughout history, we have seen time and again that the most dangerous weapon against tyranny is not the sword, it is knowledge. Knowledge gives power, and power shifts control. The Quran does not simply call people to worship. It calls them to think, to reflect, and to stand for what is right, even when it is difficult. It does not serve kings or empires. It does not bow to the powerful or the wealthy. It speaks to the soul of every human being equally, reminding them that they were created with purpose, that they were not meant to be slaves to systems designed to exploit them. That kind of message terrifies those who wish to maintain control. And so, when they cannot fight the message, they fight the perception of it. They distort it, misrepresent it, and package it as something to be feared. They try to convince the world that this book, truth has a way of surviving. No matter how much they try to suppress it, the light of truth cannot be extinguished. Because in the end, the Quran does not just call for belief, it calls for action. And that is what they fear the most. When they cannot defeat the truth, they distort it. They twist its meaning, misrepresent its message, and create fear around it. This is not new. This is the oldest trick in the book. Turn the people away from knowledge so they never realize their own power. The Quran has been called many things by those who wish to control the narrative, but the real question is not what they say, it's why they say it. Why would a book that calls for justice, mercy, and wisdom be presented as something to be feared? Why would a book that tells people to seek knowledge, to be patient, to stand against oppression, be seen as a threat? The answer is simple: because it wakes people up. It shifts the balance. It reminds people that their worth is not defined by the systems that try to enslave them. This is not just a book, it is a guide, a manual for life. It does not simply ask you to believe, it asks you to act. It asks you to stand up when others sit down, to speak when others remain silent, to seek truth even when it is uncomfortable. That is what makes it so powerful. It does not belong to any ruler, any government, any corporation. It belongs to those who are willing to live by its words. It calls for discipline in a world that thrives on distraction. It calls for self-respect in a world that profits from self-doubt. It calls for justice in a world built on injustice, and that is why they fear it, because a world where people are awake, where people are strong, where people do not just accept things as they are, but strive for what they should be, that is a world they cannot control. That is a world where deception has no power. That is a world where fear is replaced by faith, where ignorance is replaced by wisdom, where silence is replaced by action. And that is exactly what they don't want. But the truth has never needed permission to exist. It has never needed approval to be real. No matter how much they try to twist it, bury it, or hide it, the truth will always find its way into the hearts of those who seek it. Because once a person wakes up, they can never go back to sleep. Every great revolution begins with a word, not with weapons, not with violence, but with an idea so powerful that it changes everything. The Quran is not just a book. It is a revolution of the mind, the soul, and society itself. It speaks to the heart of every human being, reminding them that they were created for more than survival, that they were created for purpose, for justice, for something greater. And that is why they fear it, because the moment a person begins to think, to question, to challenge, they become dangerous to those who benefit from their ignorance. The Quran was never meant to sit on a shelf and collect dust. It is a book of action, a call to rise above fear, above doubt, above oppression. It reminds the believer that they are not powerless, that they are not small, that they are not slaves to the systems of this world. It calls upon people to break free from the chains they have been taught to wear, the chains of self-doubt, of blind obedience, of silence in the face of injustice. Because once a person understands who they truly are, they can never be controlled again. And that is what those in power fear the most. But they do not simply fear the message. They fear what happens when people actually live by it. A person who lives by the Quran is disciplined in a world that thrives on distraction. They are fearless in a world that feeds on fear. They stand for truth in a world built on lies. That kind of person cannot be manipulated, cannot be bought, cannot be silenced. And so rather than fighting them head on, the world tries to discredit the source. They twist its meaning, spread misinformation, and plant seeds of doubt. Because if they can keep people afraid of it, if they can keep them from opening it, from understanding it, then they can keep them asleep. But truth does not disappear just because someone fears it. The Quran does not need approval to be real. It has changed the world before, and it will continue to do so. Because no matter how much they try to bury it, the truth always rises. And when people wake up, when they begin to see clearly, nothing can stop them. They say words have power, but not all words shake the foundations of the world. Not all words make tyrants tremble, systems collapse, and people rise. The Quran is not just a book. It is a force, a divine truth that has endured through centuries, unchanged, unshaken, and undefeated. And that is why they fear it. Not because of the ink on its pages, but because of the fire it lights in the hearts of those who truly understand it. A fire that refuses to be put out. A fire that makes people question, think, and most importantly, act. History proves that whenever a message threatens those in power, their first weapon is deception. They do not attack with reason, nor do they challenge with truth. Instead, they distort, they manipulate, they create fear, because when people fear something, they do not seek to understand it. When they fear something, they turn away from it. The Quran has been misrepresented not because of what it says, but because of what happens when people begin to live by its words. It is a book that does not simply call for belief, it calls for strength, for discipline, for justice. It calls for the end of oppression, the end of ignorance, the end of blind submission to false authority, and that is a problem for those who profit from deception. But the Quran does not belong to kings or rulers. It does not serve governments or corporations. It belongs to the people. It was revealed for the seeker, for the lost, for the one looking for purpose beyond what this world offers. It reminds the believer that they are not weak, that they were not created without purpose, that their voice, their actions, their very existence matter. And when a person begins to realize their worth, they become fearless. A fearless person cannot be controlled. A fearless person stands for truth even when it is unpopular, even when it is dangerous, even when they are alone. And that is the real fear. The fear of a world where people are awake, where people are strong, where people refuse to accept oppression as their destiny. That is why they try to silence it, distort it, bury it beneath layers of lies. But the truth does not die. It cannot be erased, because no matter how much they fear it, The Quran will continue to light the way for those who seek it. And once a person sees the truth, they can never be blind again. Every great movement, every fight for justice, every revolution that ever changed the course of history began with one thing: a word. A truth so powerful that it could not be ignored, a message so clear that it could not be silenced. The Quran is not just a book, it is that kind of truth. It is a call to action, a force that challenges oppression, exposes falsehood, and awakens the human soul. And that is why they fear it, not because of what it says, but because of what it does. Because when people begin to live by its words, they break free from the mental and spiritual chains that have kept them bound for too long. Look at history. The greatest threat to any corrupt system has never been an army. It has always been an idea. That's why those in power do not just fear people who believe in the Quran, they fear people who understand it. A book that calls for knowledge in a world designed to keep people ignorant is dangerous. A book that calls for justice in a world built on injustice is dangerous. A book that tells people to stand up for what is right, even if they stand alone, is the greatest threat to those who rule by deception. Because once people know the truth, they can never be fooled again. So what do? They attack the book itself. They twist its message, spread lies about it, and create fear around it, not because they have proof against it, but because they have no argument strong enough to stand against it. They know that if people actually opened it, actually read it with an open mind, they would find not fear, but wisdom, not darkness, but light, not division, but unity, and a united people, a people who know their rights, who know their purpose, who know that they answer to no one but their Creator. That is the kind of people that cannot be controlled. This fear is not new. It is the same fear that made tyrants silence prophets, burn books, and rewrite history. But no matter how hard they try, the truth cannot be erased. It will continue to rise, continue to spread, continue to reach the hearts of those who seek it, because the most dangerous person in the world is not the one who holds a sword, it is the one who holds the truth. And once that truth is known, nothing can stop it. They don't fear a book. They fear what happens when people start to live by it. They fear a society where people are no longer asleep, where justice is not just a word, but a way of life. They fear a world where oppression has no place, where deception has no power, where truth cannot be bought or silenced. The Quran is not just ink on paper. It is a force that shakes the foundations of falsehood. And that is why they fear it, because once a person wakes up, once they see the truth for what it is, they can never go back to being blind. This world is designed to keep people distracted, lost in meaningless pursuits, chasing things that will never fulfill them. It tells people that their worth is measured by their wealth, their status, their appearance. But the Quran calls them to something greater, reminds them that their value does not come from this world, but from the one who created them. It tells them that they were made for more than just survival. They were made for purpose, for justice, for truth. And when a person understands that, they become dangerous to those who profit from their ignorance. That is why they distort it. That is why they try to turn people away from it, to make them fear it rather than understand it. Because a society that follows the Quran is a society that does not bow to tyrants. It is a society where the rich do not exploit the poor, where the strong do not oppress the weak, where knowledge is valued over blind obedience. It is a society where people do not accept injustice as their fate, but fight against it with wisdom, patience, and faith. And that is a society that cannot be controlled. The real fear is not the Quran itself. It is what happens when people start to think for themselves, when they start to question the world around them, when they stop being afraid. Because a person who knows the truth, who stands firm in their faith, who refuses to be manipulated, that person is unstoppable. And no matter how much they try to silence it, the message of the Quran will continue to spread. Because truth does not need permission to exist. It simply is. And once a person embraces it, they are never the same again.